Omega number 7 has no family willing to claim him. The auctioneer said it like he was announcing a cracked chair or a box of old silverware, not a living person standing barefoot on a cold marble platform with a paper tag tied around his wrist. Noah Reed kept his eyes on the floor because looking up meant seeing the faces behind the masks, and seeing them meant accepting that this was real. The underground hall smelled like expensive perfume, winter rain, and the sour bite of fear people tried to hide beneath money. Somewhere above them, New York traffic was still moving, coffee shops were closing, couples were walking home under yellow streetlights, and ordinary people were complaining about ordinary things. Noah would have given anything to be one of them. He was 21, pale from too many late nights in a used bookstore, with ink stains still caught beneath one fingernail because he had been repairing a torn page when his uncle's men came for him. They told him it was temporary. They told him debt had consequences. They told him an Omega with clean blood and no legal protector was worth more than a signature on a loan. Now he stood in borrowed white clothes that did not fit right, trying not to shake while strangers decided what his life was worth. Too thin, one alpha murmured from the front row. Pretty enough, but not royal stock. Another laughed softly. Looks like he would apologize for breathing. Noah folded his hands tighter. He wanted to disappear into the sound of rain tapping against the blacked-out windows. He wanted the smell of dust and paper from Reed and Son books, the little bell above the door, the chipped blue mug he used for tea, the old radiator that knocked 3 times before giving heat. He wanted his life back, even if it had been small. Especially because it had been small. Then the candles went out. Not one by one. All at once. A coldness swept through the room so sudden that every whispered insult died inside it. Frost crept across the marble floor in delicate silver veins, curling around the legs of velvet chairs. The masked bidders turned toward the tall doors as they opened without a hand touching them. A man stepped into the hall wearing a black coat dusted with snow, though it had not snowed anywhere in Manhattan that night. He moved like silence had made room for him. His hair was dark as midnight with a streak of silver near his temple, and his eyes were a blue so pale they looked almost lit from within. Every alpha in the room lowered their gaze. Even the auctioneer forgot how to speak. Noah knew the face from old coins, history books, and the kind of news broadcasts people watched with the volume down. Adrian Blackwell. The Alpha King. The cursed ruler of the northern houses. The man parents used as a warning and politicians praised only when cameras were watching. He did not look at the bidders. He looked only at Noah, and for one impossible second, the king's perfect, terrifying stillness cracked. His gaze dropped to the faded mark on Noah's wrist, half hidden beneath the paper tag. It was a small birthmark shaped like a broken crown. Noah had hated it his whole life without knowing why. The king's gloved hand tightened around the silver head of his cane. The air changed again, not warmer, but heavier, as if an old door had opened somewhere deep underground. "Remove the tag," Adrian said. His voice was quiet, but the room obeyed it before anyone moved. The auctioneer fumbled forward, fingers trembling as he untied the string. Noah flinched before he could stop himself. The king saw it. Something unreadable crossed his face, sharp and brief, like regret seen through ice. He stepped closer, stopping several feet away, far enough that Noah could breathe. "No one here will touch you again," he said. Noah should have felt relieved. Instead, fear rose higher in his throat. "Are you buying me?" he asked, and his voice came out small, but not broken. For the first time, the Alpha King looked less like a legend and more like a man standing in front of a wound he had arrived too late to prevent. He placed a black royal seal on the auction table. The sound of its striking marble echoed through the hall. "No," he said. "I am paying a debt my family created before you were born." A murmur rippled through the room. Noah stared at him, confused, cold, furious, and afraid all at once. Adrian's eyes returned to the mark on his wrist. This time, Noah saw it clearly. The king was not looking at an Omega he needed. He was looking at a curse that had finally found its way home. Then Adrian Blackwell said the words that turned Noah's fear into something far more dangerous. Noah Reed belongs to Blackwell Castle, he said. Not as property. As the last living heir of the curse. The first thing Noah noticed inside the royal car was not the leather seats, or the tinted windows, or the quiet guard sitting up front like a statue. It was the blanket. Someone had folded it beside him before he entered, soft gray wool, warm from a hidden heater, with a faint scent of cedar and winter air clinging to it. Noah stared at it as if it were a trap. Adrian Blackwell sat across from him, one gloved hand resting on his cane, his posture too controlled to be natural. Outside, the city blurred past in streaks of gold and red, but inside the car everything felt still, like the world was holding its breath. Noah kept his tagged wrist tucked under his sleeve even though the paper was gone. He could still feel where the string had rubbed his skin raw. "You said I was an heir," Noah said at last. His voice sounded steadier than he felt. "People do not usually drag heirs onto auction platforms." Adrian's jaw tightened, just barely. "No. They do not." That answer made Noah angrier than a denial would have. He looked away, toward the rain-speckled glass. "So what happens now? You take me to your castle, lock me in a tower, and tell everyone it is for my own protection?" The king was silent for a moment too long. "Blackwell Castle has no towers suitable for prisoners." Noah let out a tired, humorless laugh before he could stop himself. It embarrassed him immediately. He pressed his lips together, cheeks warming, because laughing in front of the most feared alpha in the country felt ridiculous. But Adrian did not mock him. He only looked at him with a strange, careful attention, as if every small sound Noah made mattered more than it should. "I will not lock you away," Adrian said. "Then why did your people take me?" Noah asked. The words came sharper now, pushed up by fear. "Why did my uncle know exactly who to sell me to? Why did everyone in that room look at my wrist like I was a ghost?" Adrian's eyes dropped again to Noah's sleeve, and this time Noah pulled his hand back fully, hiding it against his chest. The movement was too quick, too defensive. He hated that. He hated that the king saw it. Adrian slowly reached for the blanket, then stopped halfway, leaving his hand suspended between them. "May I?" he asked. Noah blinked. It was such a simple question that it unsettled him more than any command. After a second, he gave a stiff nod. Adrian lifted the blanket and placed it on the seat beside Noah, not over him, not touching him, only close enough for Noah to take it if he chose. "The mark on your wrist belongs to the Reed bloodline," Adrian said. 100 years ago, an Omega named Elias Reed entered Blackwell Castle and never left it the same way. My family built its power on what happened to him. The curse is not a myth. It is a bill that has been waiting for someone to pay it." Noah's fingers curled into the edge of his sleeve. "And I am the payment." "No," Adrian said so fast that the guard in front glanced back. The king noticed and lowered his voice. "You are not payment." Noah wanted to believe the difference mattered. He did. But he had been hungry enough to hide crackers in coat pockets. He had smiled at customers while collection notices piled under the bookstore register. He had watched his uncle count debts like they were more real than people. Words were easy. Powerful men always had beautiful words for ugly things. His stomach chose that moment to betray him with a quiet, unmistakable sound. Noah froze, mortified. Heat rushed up his neck. He turned toward the window, pretending the city lights had become fascinating. Adrian said nothing about it. He simply pressed a button near his armrest. "Mrs. Vale," he said into the intercom, "prepare something light before we arrive. Soup, bread, tea? Nothing rich." A woman's voice answered, calm and elderly. "Of course, Your Majesty." Noah's embarrassment twisted into suspicion. "I am not helpless." "I know." "Then stop acting like I might break." Adrian looked at him then, and the cold blue of his eyes softened by a fraction. "I am acting like someone should have fed you before trying to sell you." The sentence landed so gently that it hurt. Noah gripped the blanket without meaning to. For a few miles, neither of them spoke. The car left the city behind, climbing north through dark roads lined with bare trees. The rain became snow somewhere past the state line, soft flakes brushing the windows like pale ash. Noah told himself he would not sleep. He told himself he would watch every turn, remember every mile, find every possible exit. But warmth crept in. The blanket ended up over his knees. His eyelids grew heavy. Just before sleep pulled him under, he heard Adrian's voice, low and distant, speaking to the driver. "Take the east road. The bridge cameras are not secure." A pause. Then colder. "And find the man who delivered him to that auction." Quietly. Noah opened his eyes a sliver. Adrian was looking out at the snow, his expression carved from shadow, but his hand had moved to his own wrist, pressing against a black mark beneath his glove as if it had started to burn. That was the detail Noah carried with him into sleep. The cursed king had a mark too. Noah woke to the sound of bells, not loud church bells, but a low, distant chime that seemed to move through stone. For one confused second, he thought he was back above the bookstore, listening to the radiator knock awake before sunrise. Then he opened his eyes and saw a ceiling painted with silver branches, a fire burning behind a glass screen, and a bowl of soup waiting on a small table beside the bed. Blackwell Castle did not feel like a castle from a postcard. It felt older than weather. Its walls held the kind of silence that made every footstep sound like a confession. Someone had placed his worn sneakers neatly near the door, cleaned of street dirt but not replaced. That small mercy bothered him more than if they had thrown them away. It meant someone had noticed what mattered. The soup was still warm. Chicken, rice, a little thyme. Plain enough not to upset an empty stomach. Noah sat up slowly, the blanket sliding from his shoulders, and found a folded note under the spoon. "Eat before you decide to hate the room." The handwriting was sharp, formal, and unmistakably royal. Noah stared at it for a long moment, then hated himself a little for smiling. The smile disappeared when the door opened and Mrs. Vale stepped in with fresh towels. She was a small woman with silver hair, sensible shoes, and the fearless calm of someone who had survived every kind of royal mood. "His Majesty asked that you be given an hour alone," she said. "I gave you 3. Noah pulled the blanket higher. "That sounds like disobedience." "At my age, dear, it is called judgment." She crossed to the curtains and opened them. Gray morning spilled in, revealing mountains beyond the glass, miles of black pine forest, and snow falling so softly it looked unreal. Noah forgot to be guarded for half a breath. Mrs. Vale saw it and said nothing. That was her kindness. After breakfast, she led him through a corridor narrow enough that their shoulders nearly brushed the walls. Portraits watched from either side, pale Blackwell kings with beautiful faces and miserable eyes. The farther they walked, the colder the air became. Noah tucked his hands into his sleeves. "Where are we going?" "The East Wing." "That sounds like the part of the house everyone in horror movies is told not to enter." Mrs. Vale's mouth twitched. "Then I recommend not opening any singing boxes or reading Latin aloud." Noah almost laughed. Almost. The corridor ended at a door carved with the same broken crown shape as the mark on his wrist. Before Mrs. Vale could knock, the door opened from the inside. Adrian stood there in a dark shirt with no crown, no cane, and no court watching him. Without the symbols of power, he should have looked less frightening. Somehow, he looked more human, and that was worse. His sleeves were rolled to his forearms. Black lines curled beneath the skin of his left wrist like ink trapped under ice. The match to Noah's birthmark was impossible to miss. Noah looked at it. Adrian noticed. In one smooth motion, he pulled his cuff down. "You should not be here yet," he said to Mrs. Vale, but his eyes stayed on Noah. "He ate," she replied. "He slept." "He has not thrown anything heavy. I consider that progress." Adrian gave her a look that would have frozen a lake. Mrs. Vale ignored it with professional ease and left them alone. The door closed behind her, and the room suddenly felt much smaller than it was. Shelves rose to the ceiling. Old books, glass jars, maps, dried white roses hanging upside down from a beam. A private study, not a throne room. Adrian moved toward the desk, putting distance between them as if Noah were the dangerous one. You told them I belonged here, Noah said. That was a poor choice of words. It sounded practiced. Adrian paused. The silence stretched. Everything I say in public sounds practiced. Noah did not know what to do with that honesty. He crossed his arms, partly from cold, partly because he needed something between them. And in private? Adrian looked up. For a second, the king was gone again, leaving only a tired man with a curse under his sleeve and shadows beneath his eyes. In private, I am trying not to frighten you more than I already have. The answer landed too softly. Noah looked away first, annoyed that his chest had tightened. On the desk sat a chipped blue mug, ugly and familiar. His mug? From the bookstore. He stepped closer before he could stop himself. Why is this here? Your apartment above the shop was searched after your uncle's men left. I ordered your belongings secured. You went through my things? No. Mrs. Vale did. That is not better. She also threatened to resign if I allowed your books to remain in a room with a leaking roof. Noah's anger faltered, just slightly. He touched the mug with one finger. There was a tiny crack near the handle. The fact that it had made the journey intact felt absurdly important. Adrian watched him notice it, and something in his expression changed before he hid it. I did not bring you here to continue what my family began, he said. Then prove it. Noah turned back to him. Tell me what happens if the curse is not broken. Adrian's face closed like a door. Outside, the snow thickened against the windows. The black mark on his wrist shifted beneath the cuff, and this time Noah saw pain flicker through him before. Control buried it. Adrian gripped the edge of the desk. Noah moved without thinking, reaching out as if to steady him. His fingers touched the back of Adrian's gloved hand. The room went utterly still. The cold vanished from the air. Adrian stared at their hands as though Noah had done something impossible. Then, very carefully, he withdrew first. If the curse is not broken, he said, voice rougher than before, Blackwell Castle will choose its next victim. A soft sound came from the wall behind the dried roses. Not a knock. Not the wind. A whisper, thin as paper, shaped itself around Noah's name. The whisper came again, softer this time, as if the wall itself had learned Noah's name, and was testing how it tasted. Noah stepped back so quickly his shoulder hit a shelf. 3 books slid sideways, and one heavy volume dropped into his arms with a thud that made him grunt. Adrian moved at the same moment, fast enough that Noah barely saw it, but he stopped before touching him. His hand hovered in the space between them, open, restrained, almost painfully careful. Are you hurt? He asked. Noah looked down at the book pressed against his chest, then at the king's outstretched hand. Fear should have been the only thing there. Instead, his mind chose that exact moment to notice that Adrian's sleeve was crooked, one cuff button hanging by a thread, like even cursed kings lost fights with laundry. Only my dignity, Noah said before he could think better of it. Mrs. Vale's voice floated from somewhere beyond the door. That has survived worse rooms than this one, dear. Noah stared at the door. Does everyone in this castle listen through walls? Adrian exhaled once, almost a laugh, but not quite. Only the living ones. That should not have been comforting. Somehow it was. Then the temperature dropped again. Frost formed along the frame of a portrait above the fireplace, and the painted face inside it began to blur, the features shifting from a proud Blackwell king into someone younger, gentler, and unbearably sad. An Omega with light brown hair and gray-green eyes looked out from the canvas. Noah's breath caught. The resemblance was not exact, but it was close. Enough to feel like standing before an old family photograph no one had ever shown him. Elias Reed, Adrian said quietly. The name did not sound like history in his mouth. It sounded like an apology. The painted Omega's lips moved, but the voice came from everywhere at once. He will call it protection before he calls it a cage. Noah did not move. The words slipped under his skin with frightening ease because they sounded too much like what he already feared. Adrian's face went still, that cold public mask lowering over him inch by inch. "This room remembers pain," he said. "It repeats what it was taught." "That is convenient," Noah whispered. "Blame the haunted room." Adrian flinched. It was small, but Noah saw it, and immediately wished he had not. Anger was easier when the other person did not look wounded by it. The portrait faded back to oil and old varnish. For several seconds, the only sound was the fire behind the glass. Then voices rose outside the study. Polished, irritated voices, the kind used by people who believed doors were suggestions. A man entered without knocking, dressed in a charcoal suit with a silver pin shaped like a crown. He looked at Noah the way the bidders had, measuring usefulness first, humanity second. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing only enough to satisfy tradition. "The council has been waiting. I was not informed the Reed Omega would be walking freely through the east wing." Noah's spine stiffened. Reed Omega. Not Noah. Not guest. Not heir. Adrian moved one step to the side, placing himself between Noah and the man so naturally that it took Noah a second to realize it had happened. "Then consider yourself informed, Lord Mercer." Mercer's smile tightened. "With respect, the boy should be secured. Until we understand his effect on your condition, he is a royal asset." The word asset landed cold and ugly. Noah felt it in his stomach. Adrian's voice lowered. "Choose your next word carefully." Mercer glanced at him, then at Noah, and seemed to understand just enough to be afraid, but not enough to be ashamed. "I only mean that he is valuable." "He is listening," Adrian said. "And he has a name." The room became very quiet. Noah stared at the back of Adrian's black coat, at the controlled line of his shoulders. No grand declaration. No dramatic threat. Just one sentence, sharp enough to draw a boundary around him. It should not have mattered that much. It did. Mercer bowed again, lower this time. "Of course, Mr. Reed." The correction was stiff, almost bitter, but it was a correction. When Mercer left, Noah expected Adrian to turn around and explain himself. He did not. He simply adjusted the books that had fallen from the shelf, placing each one back where it belonged. His hands were steady, but the dark mark had spread above his cuff. Noah noticed. Adrian noticed him noticing. "You should return to your room," the king said. The gentleness was gone from his voice, locked away behind duty. "It is safer there." The words hurt more than Noah expected. After defending him, after asking permission before touching a blanket, after bringing his cracked blue mug across state lines, Adrian still sounded like a man building a cage and calling it a door. Noah nodded once, because his throat had gone tight and he did not trust what might come out. He walked past him, careful not to brush his sleeve. At the threshold, the whisper returned, clearer than before, right beside Noah's ear. "Asked him what happened to the last Omega who made him feel human." Noah turned back. Adrian had gone pale. Not the controlled paleness of a royal portrait, but the stunned look of someone hearing a secret spoken aloud. And for the first time since Noah met him, the Alpha King looked afraid of the answer. Noah did not ask Adrian the question in the hallway. He carried it back to his room like a glass of water filled too close to the rim, one wrong step away from spilling everywhere. "What happened to the last Omega who made him feel human?" The words followed him through dinner, through the quiet clink of a spoon against soup, through the awkward discovery that someone had folded his socks into perfect little squares inside a drawer bigger than his entire dresser back home. He almost laughed at that. Almost. At Reed and Son Books, his socks lived in a cardboard box under the bed, beside tax forms, old birthday cards, and a flashlight that only worked if you hit it against your palm. Here, even the socks looked like they had been approved by a committee. Mrs. Vale came in after sunset carrying a tray with tea and a slice of apple pie. Not fancy pie. Real pie. Uneven crust, cinnamon bubbling through one edge, the kind someone's grandmother would bring to a school fundraiser. Noah stared at it too long. "His Majesty asked for something American," Mrs. Vale said, setting it down. I told the kitchen that did not mean making a hamburger with gold leaf. Noah gave a quiet snort before he could stop himself. Mrs. Vale looked pleased, as if she had won a small war. Did he ask you to make me comfortable? Noah asked. No, she said. He asked me not to let you feel purchased. That stole the humor from the room. Noah sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded between his knees. There was another Omega, was there not? Mrs. Vale's face softened in a way that made him regret asking. There was a boy named Caleb Moore. Not a Reed. Not part of the curse. Just someone the young king once trusted enough to smile around. Noah looked up. That image was harder to picture than any ghost. What happened? Mrs. Vale smoothed the blanket at the foot of the bed, though it did not need smoothing. Court happened. Duty happened. Fear happened. Caleb wanted a life Adrian could not give him. A small apartment. Sunday groceries. Coffee from the same corner shop every morning. Ordinary things. Her voice grew quieter. Adrian thought ordinary was too dangerous for anyone near him. So he sent Caleb away before the council could use him. Noah understood that kind of hurt too quickly. Being left for your own good still felt like being left. He thought of his mother, not by blood, but by every scraped knee and packed lunch that had ever mattered. She had taken him in when he was 8, after his real parents disappeared into a story no one wanted to explain. She used to put sticky notes in his school bag because she worked double shifts and missed breakfast. Do not forget your inhaler. You are not a burden. Eat something green today. After she passed, Noah kept the notes in a shoebox. His uncle kept the debts. Did Caleb hate him? Noah asked. I think Caleb survived him. Mrs. Vale gave him a sad little smile. Those are not always the same thing. Later, when the castle settled into its deep nighttime silence, Noah could not sleep. He wrapped himself in the gray blanket and followed the glow beneath the door across the hall. Adrian's study was open. The king sat alone at his desk, surrounded by papers, one hand pressed to his marked wrist. No crown. No cane. Just stacks of reports, trade agreements, security briefings, letters from frightened towns asking for heating aid before the next storm. Beside all of it sat a plate with an untouched slice of the same apple pie. Noah knocked once. Adrian looked up, surprise crossing his face before the mask returned. You should be resting. You should be eating. Kings are allowed to be hypocrites. That is probably in the Constitution somewhere. A silence passed between them, and this time it did not feel empty. Noah stepped inside. Mrs. Vale told me about Caleb. Adrian's expression closed. She should not have. Did you love him? The question came out gentler than Noah expected. Adrian looked down at the papers. For a long moment, he said nothing. I cared for him enough to ruin it before anyone else could. Noah felt that answer in places he did not want touched. That is not noble. It is lonely. Adrian's mouth tightened, but he did not deny it. Outside the study window, snow slid from a pine branch in a soft white curtain. Noah noticed the king's cuff was damp with dark ink where the mark had spread. He reached for the pie plate instead of Adrian's hand and pushed it toward him. Eat half, Noah said. Then I will go back to my room and pretend I am not worried. Adrian stared at the pie like it was a diplomatic crisis. I dislike cinnamon. Nobody dislikes cinnamon. That is just sadness talking. For the first time, unmistakably, Adrian laughed. It was brief and rusty, like something in use for years, but real enough to warm the room by a degree. Then the door burst open without warning. Lord Mercer stood there, pale with urgency, holding a sealed document in his trembling hand. His eyes flicked from Noah's blanket-wrapped shoulders to Adrian's almost smile, and whatever he saw there made his face harden. Your Majesty, he said. The Council has invoked emergency law. By sunrise, Mr. Reed is to be transferred to royal custody beneath the chapel. Noah did not know what beneath the chapel meant. But Adrian stood so quickly the chair scraped back across the floor, and the warmth in the room vanished. No, the king said. Mercer swallowed. The order bears the full council seal. Adrian's gaze dropped to the document, then to Noah. In that small, terrible pause, Noah understood the truth before anyone said it. The cage Adrian feared building had already been prepared by someone else. Noah learned what beneath the chapel meant before sunrise, because no one in Blackwell Castle slept after the council seal appeared. The halls filled with quiet footsteps and half-finished whispers. Servants looked away when Noah passed, not cruelly, but with the frightened politeness people used around a storm they could not stop. Mrs. Vale stayed close enough to be comforting and far enough not to make him feel guarded. Adrian walked ahead of them, silent in a long black coat, his crown absent but his shoulders carrying more weight than any gold could have added. He had not looked at Noah since leaving the study. That hurt in a way Noah was not prepared for. A few hours ago, Adrian had laughed over apple pie. Now his face was cold again, sealed behind the expression that belonged on coins and official portraits. Noah told himself it was strategy. He told himself kings did not survive by looking scared in front of their enemies. Still, when they reached the chapel doors and Adrian spoke without turning around, the words landed like a door closing. "You will do exactly as I say." Noah stopped. "That sounds familiar." Adrian's hand tightened around his cane. "This is not the time." "It never is, apparently." The chapel beneath the castle was not beautiful. It was carved from dark stone, windowless and cold, with old candles lining the walls and metal holders. At the center stood a circular room behind iron gates, not a cell exactly, but close enough that Noah's stomach sank. The floor was marked with faded silver lines shaped like a broken crown. Lord Mercer waited beside the gate with 3 council members and a woman Noah had never seen before. She had white blonde hair pinned so neatly it looked painful, a tailored navy coat, and the calm smile of someone who knew how to cut with manners. "Mr. Reed," she said. "I am Evelyn Hart, Royal Legal Advisor." Noah glanced at Adrian. Nothing. No explanation. No warning. Evelyn continued. "Emergency custody is a protective measure. Until the curse responds, your movement must be limited for the safety of the realm." "The realm," Noah repeated. "That is a very big word for locking up one person." Her smile did not move. "You are not being punished. People keep saying that right before taking away my choices." That finally made Adrian look at him. Something flickered in his eyes, but it vanished when Mercer stepped forward. "Your Majesty, the Council requires your formal agreement." Noah waited for Adrian to refuse. He waited for the same voice that had corrected Mercer in the study, the voice that had said he has a name. But Adrian looked at the gate, then at Noah, and his expression went so carefully blank that Noah felt the truth leave the room before it was spoken. "For tonight only," Adrian said. Noah's breath caught. Mrs. Vale made a soft sound behind him, almost too small to hear. The iron gate opened. Noah walked inside because he would not be dragged, not by law, not by fear, not by the quiet disappointment blooming under his ribs. The room was warmer than the hallway, with a chair, a cot, and a small table someone had already placed there. On it sat his chipped blue mug. That nearly broke him. Not because it was cruel, but because it was kind in the most unbearable way. Adrian had made sure the cage had something familiar in it. Noah turned around before the gate closed. "Did you arrange that too?" he asked. Adrian's jaw tightened. "I asked that you be comfortable." Noah nodded, slow and hurt. "You are very good at making cages comfortable." The gate shut between them with a soft final click. No one spoke for a moment. Evelyn Hart watched Adrian with too much interest, as if studying a crack in marble. Mercer looked satisfied. Mrs. Vale looked ready to say something that would get her dismissed from service after 40 years. Adrian only stood there, his gloved hand resting against the iron bar nearest Noah's shoulder, close but not touching. "This keeps you alive," he said quietly. "Is that supposed to make me grateful?" "No." His voice dropped lower. "It is supposed to give me time." "For what?" Noah asked. Adrian did not answer. He stepped back instead. That was the worst part. Not the gate. Not the council. The step back. By morning, the rumor had spread through the castle like smoke. The reed Omega had been secured because the king could not control the curse around him. Noah heard it from guards who thought he was sleeping. He heard a maid whisper that maybe Caleb Moore had been lucky to leave. He sat on the edge of the cot, hands wrapped around the blue mug, and made himself breathe through the ache. Around noon, Mrs. Vale slipped in with lunch and a folded note hidden under a napkin. Her face gave nothing away. Noah waited until she left before opening it. The message was not in Adrian's sharp royal handwriting. It was older, faded, copied from some book or diary. If a Blackwell offers safety without freedom, run before love teaches you to stay. Beneath the words was a name, Elias Reed. Noah read it 3 times. Then he looked at the small windowless room, the kind soup, the clean blanket, the mug from home, and understood the cruelest part of being protected. Sometimes it felt almost like being loved. That night, while footsteps changed shift outside the chapel, Noah folded the note into his sleeve and made a decision so quietly it felt like grief. If Adrian would not let him choose freely, Noah would make the only choice he had left. He would leave before the castle taught his heart to forgive the lock. Noah waited until the guard outside the chapel sneezed for the 3rd time. It was a small thing, almost funny, the kind of ordinary human weakness that should not have mattered in a castle full of curses and royal seals. But it gave him a rhythm. Every few minutes the man sniffed, muttered under his breath, and stepped away from the gate to warm his hands near the wall heater. That was when Mrs. Vale's hairpin, slipped beneath Noah's lunch plate with no explanation at all, became more than a kindness. It became an exit. The chapel lock was old, ceremonial more than secure, built to impress frightened councils, not to stop someone with steady hands and a reason to leave. Noah's hands shook as he worked at it, not because he was afraid of being caught, but because a part of him kept waiting for Adrian to appear and say his name in that quiet voice that made leaving feel like betrayal. The lock clicked open, a small sound that seemed too fragile for the decision behind it. Noah stepped into the corridor with his blue mug wrapped in both hands. He had packed nothing else. The blanket stayed folded on the cot. The soup bowl stayed untouched. The note from Elias Reed rested against his wrist beneath his sleeve, warm from his skin. He made it halfway up the chapel stairs before the shadows at the top moved. Adrian was there. No crown. No council. No mercer. Just Adrian, standing in the dim candlelight, as if he had been waiting for the sound of Noah choosing himself. Noah understood almost immediately. Adrian had heard the gate open. He had known. And for once, he had chosen not to stop him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was worse than anger. Noah lifted the mug slightly, because his hands needed something to do. "I was going to leave this in the study," he said. Adrian looked at the chipped blue ceramic. His expression did not change, but his eyes did. "You should keep it. It came here because of you. It belonged to you before me." That was the kind of answer that made leaving harder, and Noah hated him a little for it. He walked up the last step and held the mug out. Adrian did not take it. His gloved hand stayed at his side, closed tightly enough that the leather creaked. Noah's voice dropped. "You told them yes." Adrian's gaze lowered. "I did." No excuse. No careful explanation. Just the truth, standing between them like iron. Noah swallowed. "I waited for you to say no." "So did I." The words were so quiet Noah almost missed them. When he understood, something in his chest bent out of shape. Adrian looked toward the chapel below, where the old silver lines glimmered faintly in the dark. "If I had refused in that room, Mercer would have removed you from my protection completely. Evelyn Hart had already prepared the transfer order. Government custody. A medical facility outside the state. No visitors. No veil. No books. No choice at all." Noah's fingers tightened around the mug. "You could have told me. Not with them listening. You could have looked at me." That landed. Adrian closed his eyes for 1 second, and when he opened them again, the mask was gone. He looked exhausted. Young, somehow. Not like a king. Like a man who had learned every way to lose someone, and still failed the test when it mattered. I thought if I looked at you, I would ask you to trust me. His voice thinned at the edges. And I had no right. The corridor felt too narrow for the amount of hurt inside it. Noah wanted to forgive him. That scared him more than the chapel had. Forgiveness could be another kind of lock if you stepped into it too soon. He placed the blue mug on the stone ledge beside Adrian. The tiny sound it made was gentle and final. I cannot stay because you are trying to save me. Adrian stared at the mug. I know. Do you? Noah asked. Because everyone here keeps turning my life into a problem to manage. My uncle did it with debt. The auctioneer did it with price. The council does it with law. And you. His voice trembled, but he held it steady. You do it with protection. Adrian's hand moved to the iron railing, not reaching for Noah, only holding himself still. The dark mark had spread past his wrist now, visible above the glove, thin black lines disappearing under his sleeve. I am trying to learn the difference. Learn without keeping me locked up. The sentence hung there, small and impossible. Adrian nodded once. Then he stepped aside. It was not dramatic. There was no command, no plea, no promise that he would follow. He simply made room for Noah to pass. That hurt most of all. Noah picked up his coat from the hook near the chapel door. It was the same cheap brown coat he had worn the night of the auction, now cleaned and mended along the torn pocket with neat black stitches. He ran his thumb over the repair, and his throat tightened. Adrian had not told him about that either. He only did things quietly, after the damage, as if love were something to hide until it was too late. Noah walked past him. At the outer door, cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of pine and snow. He paused without turning around. What happened to Caleb? He asked. Adrian answered after a long silence. I sent him away before he could choose to leave. Noah nodded, blinking hard. Then do not make me your second mistake. He stepped into the snow before Adrian could reply. Behind him, the castle bells began to ring, slow and deep, not for a ceremony, not for a death, but for an escape. Noah did not look back until he reached the tree line. When he finally did, Adrian was still standing in the open doorway, one hand pressed to the spreading mark beneath his sleeve, watching the only person who could save him disappear into the white. The door stayed open long after Noah vanished into the trees. Snow drifted across the threshold and melted on the black stone floor, leaving small silver puddles around Adrian's boots. No one dared tell the king to come inside. The guards stood with their eyes lowered. Mrs. Vale waited at the foot of the stairs with her hands folded tightly in front of her apron, and even Lord Mercer, who had arrived breathless with outrage, lost the nerve to speak when he saw Adrian's face. It was not anger. Anger would have been easier to survive. This was recognition, quiet and devastating, the look of a man who had finally understood the shape of the damage only after the room went empty. Adrian turned back toward the chapel alone. The gate beneath the stone arch still hung open. Inside, the cot was neatly made. The gray blanket had been folded with almost painful care. The soup sat cold on the table, untouched, a thin skin forming across the surface. Beside it was the note from Elias Reed, left flat where Noah must have read it again and again. Adrian picked it up with 2 fingers. If a Blackwell offers safety without freedom, run before love teaches you to stay. For a moment, he could not move. Then he saw the blue mug was gone from the cell and remembered where Noah had placed it. On the ledge upstairs. Not thrown. Not broken. Returned. Somehow that hurt worse. Mrs. Vale found him in the study an hour later, standing before his desk with the mug in his hands. The chipped handle fit awkwardly against his gloves. It was a poor, ordinary thing, bought from some clearance shelf years ago, worth less than the silver spoon beside his untouched tea. Yet Adrian held it as if it were a crown he had no right to wear. You let him go, Mrs. Vale said. Adrian did not look up. Too late. Still, you let him go. I opened the door after building the room. His voice was flat, almost calm. That does not make me kind. Mrs. Vale stepped closer. No. It makes you late. There is a difference. He gave the smallest, bitterest smile. You always were generous with impossible people. Only the ones who might become decent if they stopped being dramatic before breakfast. It should have amused him. It did not. He set the mug on the desk and noticed something tucked inside it. A folded napkin from the chapel tray. Noah's handwriting was uneven, as if written in a hurry. Do not find me because the curse needs me. If you ever come, come because you understand why I left. Adrian read it once. Then again. The words did not change. Across the room, the fire cracked softly. Outside, castle bells continued to sound through the snowy morning, announcing to every village and every council house that the Reed Omega had escaped royal custody. By noon, the rumors had already become useful lies. Mercer told the court that Noah had fled because the curse made him unstable. Evelyn Hart advised a formal search order, clean language for a hunt dressed as concern. Adrian listened from the throne without speaking. To the public, he looked exactly as he always had, cold, remote, untouchable. The cursed king carved from winter. But under the black sleeve of his coat, the mark had spread nearly to his elbow, and in his pocket was a napkin folded so many times the edges had softened. When Mercer said, "The Omega must be retrieved before he becomes a danger to himself," Adrian finally raised his eyes. The room went silent. "His name is Noah Reed," he said. Mercer paled. Adrian stood, slower than usual, because pain made every movement precise. "And any man who uses the word retrieved in my hearing again will explain to the public why this council was preparing to send an innocent citizen to a locked facility across state lines." Evelyn's polished expression cracked. "Not much." "Enough." Adrian looked from face to face, seeing fear, calculation, resentment. All the things he had once mistaken for loyalty. "There will be no search order," he said. "There will be no royal claim. No custody request. No quiet transfer. If Noah Reed returns to this castle, it will be because he chooses to walk through the front door." Mercer's mouth opened. "Your Majesty, without him, the curse may advance beyond treatment." Adrian's answer came softly. "Then it advances." That was the sentence that ended the meeting. Not loudly. Not with thunder or spectacle. Just 3 words, spoken by a king who had finally found something he would not take. Later, when the court emptied and the throne room fell still, Adrian returned to Noah's room. The socks were still folded in the drawer. The repaired coat was gone. The gray blanket remained by the window, carrying a faint trace of tea, old books, and winter air. On the bedside table, Noah had left one thing behind without noticing, a small bookstore receipt, creased at the corners. Adrian picked it up. Reed and Son Books, $24.86. Paid in cash. Item, used poetry collection, damaged cover. At the bottom, in handwriting that must have belonged to Noah before all of this, someone had written, "Keep for rainy days." Adrian stood there until the light faded from the mountains. Then, for the first time in years, he took off his gloves and touched the broken crown mark on his own wrist without hiding it. The curse burned. The room stayed empty. And somewhere beyond the black pine forest, Noah Reed was free because Adrian Blackwell had finally learned the first rule of loving him: do not follow. Noah did not return to Blackwell Castle the next day, or the day after that, or for many weeks. After the snow melted from the mountain roads, he went back to the city first, because running away was not the same as having a home, and freedom felt strange when no one was telling him where to stand. Reed and Son Books was waiting for him with plywood over one window, water stains on the ceiling, and dust thick enough to write his name in. Someone had repaired the lock. Someone had paid the overdue power bill. Someone had left 3 boxes of his books stacked neatly behind the counter, labeled by genre in handwriting that was not Adrian's, but was far too organized to be anyone else's idea. Mrs. Vale, probably. Noah sat on the floor between the shelves and laughed until his eyes burned. Then he cried, not dramatically, not beautifully, just with his knees pulled to his chest and his coat still on, because for the first time no one was watching him be brave. Spring came slowly. Customers returned one by one. A college student bought used poetry for a class she was already behind in. An old man came every Friday for Western novels and pretended not to like the store cat that had adopted the front window. Noah fixed the bell above the door himself with a $7 screwdriver and a video tutorial that paused every time the Wi-Fi blinked. Some nights he missed the castle so sharply it embarrassed him. He missed the smell of cedar in cold air. He missed the way Adrian always stopped before touching anything that belonged to him. He missed a laugh that had lasted less than 2 seconds and somehow stayed longer than fear. But missing someone was not a reason to return to a place that had taught him how easily kindness could become a lock. So Noah stayed. He learned the shape of his own days. He ate breakfast before noon. He kept receipts. He bought a real winter coat on clearance even though it was the wrong season. And every Tuesday, a sealed envelope arrived with no royal crest, no demand, no apology trying to buy its way into forgiveness. Just one page. Sometimes it was an update about the council being investigated, suspended, and slowly rebuilt under public oversight. Sometimes it was a copy of a law granting Omegas the right to refuse royal custody. Sometimes it was only a sentence. Today I walked through the east wing and left every door open. Noah kept all the letters in a shoebox beneath the register, beside his mother's old sticky notes. He did not answer until the first heavy rain of summer. The bell above the shop door rang at 6:15 in the evening, soft and familiar. Noah looked up from the counter and found Adrian Blackwell standing just inside, water beading on a plain dark coat, no guards behind him, no crown, no gloves. The broken mark on his wrist was still there, but faded now, like a bruise time had almost forgiven. He looked around the bookstore as if entering a chapel. "We are closed," Noah said. His voice was steady, but his hands forgot what to do with the pencil they were holding. Adrian nodded. "I saw the sign." "Then why come in?" "Because the door was unlocked." A pause. Then, quieter. "And because I understand why you left." Noah looked at him for a long time. The man before him was still a king. Still dangerous to the life Noah had fought to keep. But he was also wet from the rain, holding a paper bag from the corner bakery, looking uncertain in a way no portrait would ever dare show. "What is in the bag?" Noah asked. Adrian glanced down as if he had forgotten it was there. "Apple pie. No gold leaf." Against his will, Noah smiled. It was small. It was not forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. But it was real. Adrian saw it and did not step closer. That mattered. Noah came around the counter, turned the lock on the front door, and walked past him to switch on the kettle. "1 cup of tea," he said. "Then you go back to your hotel." Adrian's shoulders eased with something that looked almost like gratitude. "Of course." They sat by the front window while rain painted the glass silver. They did not solve everything. They did not pretend the past had been gentler than it was. Adrian spoke of laws and empty rooms and the terrible discipline of not following someone you love. Noah spoke of fear, of cardboard boxes, of learning to sleep without listening for footsteps. The tea went cold before either of them noticed. Outside, ordinary people hurried through ordinary rain, carrying groceries and umbrellas and late dinners home. For once, Noah did not envy them. When Adrian finally stood to leave, he did not ask when he could come again. Noah respected him more for that. At the door, Noah reached into the drawer and took out the chipped blue mug. He held it for a moment, then placed it on the counter between them. "Next Tuesday," he said softly. "Bring cinnamon rolls instead." Adrian looked at the mug, then at Noah, and the hope in his face was so careful it nearly broke them both. He nodded once. "Next Tuesday." After he left, Noah did not lock the door right away. He stood in the warm light of his small bookstore, listening to the rain and the fading sound of footsteps on the sidewalk. Adrian Blackwell had once needed an Omega to survive a curse. But love, real love, had asked something harder of him. It had asked him to let Noah choose himself first. And because he finally had, Noah allowed the smallest part of his heart to wonder what might happen next Tuesday.